Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this very special meeting of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We are joined today by Colonel Roland Butler, who is the head of the Maryland Police Training Center, if I'm not mistaken. I probably got the title incorrect, but I want to welcome you, sir, to our meeting and to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with the commission. We know you weren't able to join us for the hearing in April, but we are grateful to have this conversation with you today. And yeah, I was just sort of going over, just seeing how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. You know, while people are still coming in, I figure we can get started. So I will turn things over to Commissioner Michelle Coles, who will facilitate this conversation.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Creary and Colonel Butler. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really grateful to have the opportunity to learn from your wisdom and your experience that will help inform the recommendations that the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be making to the Maryland General Assembly to bring about reconciliation from Maryland's painful legacy of racial terror lynchings. I'd like to quickly turn it to Counsel Sophie in the Office of Attorney General, who's going to start us off with just reading the statute that authorizes the work of the commission, and then she will pass it back to me. Thank you.
The Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established in 2019 by House Bill 307 and amended by House Bill 297 in 2021 and Senate Bill 478 in 2023. The act states as follows: whereas lynching or the extralegal murder of an individual is an act of mob violence, is a violation of the rights to due process and equal protection of the law, and whereas at least 40 African Americans were lynched by white mobs in Maryland between 1854 and 1933, and whereas no person was ever tried, convicted, or otherwise brought to justice for participating in these racially motivated lynchings, and whereas various state, county, and local government entities colluded in the commission of these crimes and conspired to conceal the identities of the parties involved, and whereas these crimes far exceeded any notion of justice, just retribution, or just punishment, but were intended to terrorize African American communities and force them into silence and subservience to the ideology of white supremacy. And whereas no victim's family or community ever receives a formal apology or compensation from the state, county, or local government entities for the violent loss of their men, and whereas restorative justice requires a full knowledge, understanding, and acceptance of the truth before there could be any meaningful reconciliation, now therefore be it enacted by the General Assembly of Maryland that there is a Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The act further provides for the commission members consisting of representatives from the Commission on Civil Rights, the State Archives, Maryland Historical Trust, the Commission on African American History and Culture, the Maryland State Conference of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, the Maryland Center for History and Culture, formerly known as Maryland Historical Society, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, the Lily Mae Carroll Jackson Civil Rights Museum, Maryland's 4 historically Black universities, Bowie State University, Coppin State University, Morgan State University, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, with 4 public members appointed by the governor. Staff for the commission is provided by Bowie State University in consultation with the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project and by the Office of the Attorney General. The staff member provided by the Office of the Attorney General may subpoena for the attendance of a witness to testify or for production of documents in connection with any investigation or hearing conducted by the commission. The commission shall hold regional hearings open to the public in areas in which a lynching of an African American by a white mob has been documented, received from the public, including those from families and communities affected by racially motivated lynchings, recommendations for addressing, engaging, and reconciling communities affected by racially motivated lynchings, including the erection of memorial plaques or signage at the sites of racially motivated lynchings, and make recommendations for addressing the legacy of lynchings that are rooted in the spirit of restorative justice. In the hearings, the commission may research cases of racially motivated lynchings for which there is no documentation, should those cases be brought to the commission's attention, and the involvement of state, county, and local government entities and relevant news medias in the cases of racially motivated lynchings. On September 1st, 2020, the commission submitted an interim report of its findings and recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly. On or before December 1st, 2025, the commission shall submit its final report of its findings and recommendations to the governor and General Assembly.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that, Sophie. So as you've heard, the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission is charged with reconciling the painful chapter in Maryland's history of racial terror lynchings. And one of the best ways to do that is to prevent similar injustices from continuing to happen. Some may wonder, what do historic lynchings and policing have in common? Before I address that, I would just like to acknowledge that police play an important role in keeping all communities, including African-American Black communities, safe. And many, if not most, officers enter the force with a desire to serve their communities, and they frequently put themselves in harm's way to protect others. And all of that is very commendable. Nevertheless, to frame our conversation, it is important to note that there are racial disparities in law enforcement interactions that are well documented, both historically, with the vast majority of lynching victims being Black, and that continued to this day. To frame the conversation that we're going to have going forward, I just want to highlight some of those connections, similarities that lynchings in the past and modern policing do still have in common. Many of the historic lynchings that we investigated did have some level of law enforcement involvement. Sometimes police were identified as members of the lynch mob. Other times they were spectators, and other times they were accomplices by giving the murderers access to the victim. Further, modern statistics show that even today, Black people are most likely to be victims of police homicides, as a Black person in Maryland is 4 times as likely to be killed by police as a white person. And that's not even accounting for the dozens of misclassified homicides that the Maryland's Office of Attorney General's office recently uncovered. Black people are also more likely to be wrongly convicted of crimes. 3/4 of the documented cases of wrongful convictions involved Black people. Black people are more likely to have force used against them, as well as be arrested for low-level, non-violent offenses than a white person. And similar to the perpetrators of lynchings, officers that are involved in the deaths of civilians today are rarely held accountable, even when their conduct blatantly violates their training and the department's policy. And also similar to lynchings, there's a much higher rate of unsolved homicides for Black victims, whereas more than half of Black murders go unresolved compared to only 20% of white victims. And altogether, what this means is that both in the cases of lynchings and modern policing and officer-involved deaths, citizens are being hurt and underserved by the people that their tax dollars support. At the end of this year, as you just heard, the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be submitting our report and recommendations to the Maryland General Assembly. And we want these recommendations to be informed and workable, which is why we have asked you to come and speak with us and share your wisdom and expertise, and I hope your honest opinions about some of the solutions that we may be proposing. Maryland is far from alone in its challenges to the fair administration of justice, and it's not even the worst offender in the US by far. But I think that we can do better. And I am hopeful that Maryland can lead the way on what equitable, fair, and just policing could look like, so that we may even be able to give other states an example to follow. Perhaps Maryland can be the first state where Black parents no longer have to have the talk with their children. And we all know that talk is not as simple as don't commit crimes. Perhaps we could set the record for the fewest officer-involved deaths, the fewest wrongful convictions, the fewest lawsuits, and the fewest complaints against police. And I hope that you'll share my belief that that's a goal worth striving for. Are you ready to get started, Colonel Butler? Okay. Would you mind taking your phone off of mute?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Thank you. So I'd like to just start by getting a better understanding of the role of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. Could you please describe the function that that commission serves for police in Maryland?
Well, first off, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to participate today. You all went over and beyond to allow me to do this virtually as opposed to being there in person, since my schedule is rather unusually tight. I'm Roland Butler. I am the Secretary of the Maryland Department of State Police, which encompasses the State Fire Marshal's Office. I am also currently the Chair of the Maryland Police Training Commission. Also, you have Mr. Wayne Silver, who is actually the Executive Director of the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. And what he does is he actually oversees the actions of the actual commission itself. I am simply the chair. We work in unison to ensure that we recognize the trends that are going on, not only in Maryland, but across the state. If we want to go back to looking at the history of law enforcement, obviously law enforcement has had challenges, and challenges, to put it lightly. We wind the clock back, and what happened was absolutely horrible. And I think it was, I have to thank the AG for allowing us to be part of the Maryland Truth and Lynchings Commission, even if it was just providing security so those that attended those meetings would feel comfortable.
We're
And,
so grateful.
Yes, appreciate it. We started out in Western Maryland, and I have to say it had an impact on the troopers that were there. They're different, and that's what you're looking for. I think all too often, if you go back to the challenges faced by law enforcement, particularly in other entities within society, people think, oh, it's only this one way of thinking. To be part of society and protect society, you have to view it from a holistic point of view. What are the differences between people other than the color of the skin? You start that conversation and you get people thinking, and you talk to them about the past and what people dealt with. It helps frame the future and their perspective of any interaction. You know, law enforcement make no exception. It was weaponized at one point. Law enforcement has a job to do enforcing laws, but it also guides the course of people's life and makes them feel safe. Not every intervention that a law enforcement officer has needs to end with arrest or charges. Sometimes the law enforcement officer, many that I had growing up in Washington, D.C. in the neighborhood, the Officer Friendly Program, they were the steadying force. They were the people that reinforced the foundation of the values your parents and neighbors gave you. And more importantly, they help you make good decisions. And I think for anyone, we all know life is about making good decisions. And in those moments is where you're challenged, you need to have somebody you can fall back on in a time of crisis that'll help you over that hurdle. That's what I see as one of the roles for law enforcement. That only happens through education, training, and understanding. You know, in the Maryland State Police and in the Commission, we look at national best practices as to what we can do to improve the quality of law enforcement, the interactions that we have, and also to lessen the need to use force in any situation, things like that. It requires a living curriculum, is the way I would describe it. You can set up your curriculum. I think we stand at 27 weeks of training, education, but you have to look at every module of training that you give a person. And their training doesn't start just there after, 27 weeks. We don't have a finished product. 27 weeks, we have a foundation to build upon. And, I've told every one of my graduates, it was told to me, you will never stop studying until the day that you stop being a law enforcement officer. Retire, resign, move on, what have you. We all bring personal experiences to our jobs and our contacts, and it's critical that people understand how their personal experiences play into their decision-making and their thinking. We've all heard about unconscious bias. When you start to tell people about unconscious bias and make them understand that, hey, in a time of crisis, you need to look at the complete picture. You don't become myopic. You don't bring in past experiences that you had. And really, that's the same thing we're asking the public. I've had negative experiences with law enforcement growing up as a young man, but that didn't jade my opinion of law enforcement. Those experiences were countered by the law enforcement officers that lived in the neighborhood, the ones that I interacted with, the ones that would come out and coach a sport, throw the ball around, things like that. You have to look at life through a different optic. Will we have problems? Yes, we will, but we need to minimize the impact of those problems. When I use that term problem or euphemism like that, no problem should cost an individual their life. No problem should cost an individual their life. When you start talking about the educational aspect, we teach about innate bias, unconscious bias. We also need to look at how we embrace de-escalation.
Yes.
Escalation is not a simple word. De-escalation is understanding what the other person is going through and making sure you can communicate with them. And I think most of us grew up with an environment where we saw people that called themselves communicating. But are you talking to the person or are you talking at the person? And I think we've all had instances where people were talking at us. When you're talking at an individual, they may get 10% of what you're saying. They're going to miss the richness of the message you're trying to convey. When you can break it down, show empathy, and talk to a person, you're starting to bridge that divide that exists in a moment of crisis or in a moment of casual contact. Law enforcement officers have to be prepared for people to bring their past experiences with law enforcement, positive and negative, to any contact they have. And it doesn't simply say, hey, I wasn't the one that wronged you. No, law enforcement represents a bigger picture. When you see me in uniform, it's not just Roland Butler. Effectively, it's every law enforcement officer that a person has had an encounter with. So how can I ensure that Roland Butler's contact or one of my troopers' contact is different? That comes through education, understanding, and education and understanding. One, they can't occur on paper. They can't be about PowerPoint. They have to exist in the areas or any areas where these people are constantly. So it has to go from top to bottom in the department. Also with that, you need community involvement. The one thing I never liked was the thought that law enforcement was siloed.
Mm-hmm.
Police officer, hey, I only hang out with other police officers. Why is that? You want a good litmus test as to where you stand? How do your friends that are not in law enforcement view you and your actions? That's very important. You know, you don't surround what do we talk about in a formal setting in the business world? Groupthink. Groupthink is not healthy. Your best friends are your friends that are going to tell you the absolute truth, share it with you in a manner that, one, you can digest, you can look and self-reflect, and you can admit, hey, I'm wrong, or hey, I can do better there. And I think from top to bottom, Mr. Silver and I sitting on that commission, that's what we strive for. Excuse me. The commission's job is to ensure that the people that we certify as police officers have the qualities and attributes necessary to protect the public, treat people fairly. Those are two critical things. They can be challenging at times. I think oftentimes when you hear from Mr. Silver, you hear about people that may have stepped away from law enforcement, or they go from one department to another where they've gotten themselves in trouble. I will tell you right now, there is no rubber stamp. None. You will allocate for everything that you have done, and also explain to us what you would do different in the future. And that's you hear those two things, but the next question, that third one, why would you do it differently now than you did it then?
Mm-hmm.
People grow. People do make mistakes. However, a mistake by a law enforcement officer, I think, is much more critical than a mistake by the average person that doesn't have control of an individual's freedom. They do not have the authority to take a person's life. We need to understand what we do is critical. Every day is a critical day. You can't have a bad day, so to speak.
Yeah.
Make sure you're grounded, make sure you're prepared, and make sure you understand your role to help others.
Absolutely. If I could just interject, I appreciate everything that you just said, and you touched on a lot of topics that I definitely want to talk about today. And I just want to drill down a little deeper in a couple areas to find out more about how the principles you just espoused are institutionalized through the training. And Mr. I don't remember your title. Is what's Mr.
Executive Director, Mr. Silver.
Okay.
Executive Director.
Executive Director Silver, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time as well. And if there's any question I ask Mr. Butler that either of you think Mr. Silver is the more appropriate person to respond, please feel free to jump in on this conversation. I'd like to go back to better understanding the role of the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission. You mentioned that there's a 27-week training. Does every police officer in the state of Maryland go through that centralized 27-week training? So any police officer I meet anywhere, have they been trained through your commission? Could you just elaborate and explain that a little more to me?
Mr. Silver, before you take that, I want to clarify the position. The 27 weeks of training apply to the Maryland State Police Academy.
Okay.
Each academy may have a different length. Some offer opportunities for lateral officers that are much shorter. Some may be longer when you look at some state agencies that deal with different things, natural resources, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, Executive Director Silver establishes criteria for the training curriculum, and then those departments have to abide by that. Mr. Silver?
Can I just follow up really quickly? When you say those departments, so if I'm in Prince George's County's police department, are they abiding by the same standards that are being set by your commission?
Yes, ma'am.
But the training that those officers would go through would take place within their department as opposed to coming to a centralized place to get trained?
Correct. Each department, for the most part, runs their own training program. Now, what you'll get, some of your other departments, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, they may pick up some of the municipal applicants, things like that, or train for the sheriff's office. The state police is unique in that we run our own training academy.
Okay, so you run your own training academy, but you also set the standards that every other police officer in Maryland is supposed to be trained under.
You're kind of using two roles that I have.
Okay.
As the superintendent, the state police set our training standards in conjunction with what the commission requires, the minimum standards.
Okay.
We look for what we need to do, and based upon that, we set up our curriculum. It's approved by the commission, and we have to meet all those training mandates. Now, the second hat that I wear, I happen to chair the commission. I think I'm in my second term, Mr. Silver.
Yes, sir.
Chairing the commission who makes the decisions when it comes to review, revocation, or suspension of police privileges, for lack of a better term, which is your authority to be a police officer in the state of Maryland. Mr. Silver, could you elaborate on that a little more? Just to explain what you do to the commission.
Certainly, Colonel. So the Police Training and Standards Commission, we certify over 15,500 police officers in the state of Maryland. And it doesn't matter what your title is, whether it is a police officer or a trooper or a deputy sheriff, you are still a police officer in Maryland. That is your title under the Public Safety Act. So what we do, as the Colonel alluded to, is we establish the standards. And the way we establish those standards in a few ways. Number one is we approve the training objectives that must be taught, tested, and mastered of every police officer in the state of Maryland. And currently there's over 700 objectives that must be met. As the Colonel said, his academy is 27 weeks long. That's about the norm. There are some, like natural resources, that are much longer because they have very unique responsibilities. But Maryland, your academy has to be at least 850 total hours. But currently there's not an academy in Maryland that is under 1,000 hours. So there's a lot of testing with this. We just recently, 2 years ago, we revamped all of our academic qualifications through the objectives. We took them down to the foundation and we rebuilt every single one of them. And the reason we did that is because my commission and commission staff, we looked at it and we wanted to change the mindset of police officers in Maryland. And the best way I could put it is some of the old objectives would teach someone how to do something, but they really didn't delve into why you should do it and when you should do it. So many of our objectives now, critical thinking is a big part of that. The easiest example I can give is that under the old objectives, it would teach a police officer how to tow a vehicle, how to fill the forms out, those type of things. Under the new objectives, it still teaches them how to tow a vehicle, but it also spends time teaching them when to tow a vehicle and why to tow a vehicle. We also put a heavy emphasis, as the Colonel mentioned, on de-escalation. You should know that a de-escalation program is just that. It's a program. It's not a 1-hour course you can give someone. It pretty much starts day one of an academy and goes through the entire process, whether you're teaching communication de-escalation skills, whether you're teaching certain tactics you can use to de-escalate a situation. One of them being is maybe we're just going to build some discretionary time in dealing with this individual and not have to rush right in and do something. So we have really built that. There are 21 police academies in the state of Maryland. Okay. And one thing I'm very proud of, and I think the Colonel would probably agree, is nationwide, the recruitment of police officers has been very difficult. Okay. Our commission, as the Colonel said, there's no rubber stamp. We have not dropped our standards. And we have no problem with sending an individual in front of the commission and telling them, no, we're not going to certify you as a police officer. So we take that role very important. We also get in a lot now to the standards of police, whether it's how to use body-worn cameras, when they have to be turned on, wellness programs. And a big thing that we really push now with academies is human performance. In other words, training officers to understand, part of its empathy, part of its realization that you can have two people at the same situation and view the situation completely opposite, and nobody's lying. It's all based off of their perspective, their files, their life lessons, everything they've had. So we really have tried to raise policing in the state of Maryland, raise the training of policing. And I've been now 3.5 years as the executive director, and I think we've made some great strides with that.
Do you guys look at metrics, outcome metrics, as you change the trainings? Do you then evaluate if the outcomes are also changing?
The commission does not directly do that. What we do, though, is we have an aggressive auditing unit that we ensure that what the commission has directed academies to teach is in fact being taught. It's funny when I have to call a chief of police, some of them don't like it when I call, just simply because, and same thing with the certification units. Now, what we do is we do a job task analysis at a minimum of every 10 years. And what we do with that job task analysis is we reevaluate what is the role, what is the function, what is the responsibility of a police officer to ensure that we're up to date with what an officer needs to know and what they don't need to know. One thing I do like is that we are very scientific on how we train police officers. It truly starts from day one. And in most academies, to include the state police and our academy here, the very first thing they learn is how to approach someone and say hello. Because it all starts from those building blocks at the very beginning of the academy and as you go through.
Okay. And then another question I have is, you mentioned that there are 700 objectives that have to be met.
Mm-hmm.
Are some of those objectives dictated through state legislation? Or are they all independent of what the Maryland General Assembly may require?
Oh, no. Many of them are dictated by the General Assembly. To not just our entry-level objectives, but also training requirements that are ongoing, reoccurring. What the General Assembly usually does is they will give us a framework of what they feel needs to be taught, and then we will flush it out and develop those objectives based off of that framework to make sure that we're meeting the requirements of the General Assembly. Colonel?
Ms. Coles, just to go back a little bit, I understand what you're looking for in the correlation between training and actual actions. Every chief law enforcement officer, chief, superintendent, whatever, should be looking at that in conjunction with what they're experiencing as far as complaints from the public, internal affairs, and what we do at the Maryland State Police. We look at our yearly use of force report. Our use of force report details every use of force that a trooper has. Then we go back and look at that in conjunction with our folks at education and training. Are the troopers adhering to training? Does the training need to be modified? Are we meeting the goals and objectives and the criteria, one, of the legislature, two, that the general public needs to feel safe and the expectations they have of their law enforcement officers? And those are tough conversations. There are a lot of people in the room. We want everybody's opinion, and we need to understand, are we on the mark? Are we off the mark? Are there adjustments that we need to make? And when we make an adjustment, obviously we notify Mr. Silver at the commission. He and I have a great relationship. Hey, the state police is thinking about doing this, this, and this. Is one of the things we've experienced. You look at not only your state practices, but you have to look at national best practices. Nothing is happening in a vacuum. And, I'll take something as simple as civil disturbance. We know that what's going on out on the West Coast right now, that's something we're watching each and every day. And hopefully once there's an after action review, we can chime in and look at that and make sure we have the best education and training product here in Maryland.
Okay. I'd like to go through a series of different types of solutions to address some of the racial disparities in police interactions. I imagine that you guys are already implementing, to a certain degree, most, if not all of these. And so I would love to just get your feedback on whether they're already being implemented, how it's going with the implementation, where the gaps are, and where it could possibly be improved. And you've touched on a number of these already. The first one just falls under the broad bucket of training and education. And I'd like to talk about how you give officers, how you increase their cultural competency so that when they are interacting with communities that may be different from the community that they grew up in, they are not operating from a place of fear of the unknown, but instead are able to find a way to relate to the people. And so how is that infused into the training to emphasize cultural competency with different communities?
Okay, Mr. Silver and I are probably going to tag team this. I'm going to give you the state police point of view and let him follow up with the overall point of view. One of the unique things about the State Police Academy, we have what they call a charge of quarters, or the CQ, and then we have section leaders depending upon how large that class is. And as you can imagine, with diversity in the class, you find yourself taking direction and understanding from different people. It rotates out every few days. And what we try to do is build down that barrier. The last thing you want in any profession, especially law enforcement, is someone that's gotten their reality from something they saw on TV or from a limited number of contacts, assuming that, oh, everyone must be this way. And I think that's one of the nuances to the State Police Academy. You don't go home at 5 o'clock at night, and there's nothing wrong with those academies where you do, but you live there. You live there. Monday through Friday, you're there. Sometimes on the weekend, you may be held back, but you live there. You're living the lived experience of another person, the person that's in the bunk room with you, the person that's in the room next door. You see what they understand through their eyes, and they see through your eyes. And I think that's where you start to bridge that divide. The instructors are effective to make sure that there's no one, let's say, siloing behavior, and to force people to interact and understand one another. That being said, we also look at national issues and discuss those in an open format. Mr. Silver?
Thank you, Colonel. Much of what is done throughout the state through the commission is exactly as the Colonel said. Even in those academies where they're not living, where they go home at 5 o'clock, there's still things that are done within that academy to kind of make sure that people aren't just going off to their own clique. It's done with changing the rotation of where they sit, changing who the squad leader is every week so that they get used to seeing different perspectives. And a lot of this actually occurs as well when we get into what's known as situational based learning, where you're actually putting them in environments that perhaps they're not comfortable with or they don't have a lot of experience in. And just to realize that maybe perhaps the initial perception of what you were walking into, it wasn't that at all. And you know, sometimes they think it's a gotcha thing, but it isn't. It's just to give you an awareness that you thought you were walking into one thing and it was completely different. So you have to take each person and each situation as its own separate entity, not necessarily off of what you think you knew or you had heard in the past.
Does the situational based learning involve real live community members, or is it still in the training context of only involving people in law enforcement?
That depends on the academy. Some academies will run what's known as a community policing program for citizens, and they will oftentimes use them as the role players. Other academies do not, because it's a balancing act, because these situational based learning opportunities are very specifically structured to have an end result. So you have to be careful that you don't use people that are going to go, for lack of a better term, rogue, and like start running when they're not supposed to start running, or they're very, very structured for safety reasons, but also because there is a core objective that you are trying to apply during that training environment.
But I mean, just to interject at the same time, that is real life as well, right? Real life isn't going to replicate a strict training environment. You're going to have the person that does the unexpected.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
You're also talking about building the foundation of those interactions. You need to build the foundation of what the expectations are and kind of the crawl, walk, run mentality. One of the things that MSP, and I know other academies do it, we can start off with controlled environment with instructors playing the role. Then we can bring in civilians to play those roles also. But I think the critical part of this is that you build a sound foundation for an individual. You're taking them in, you're re-educating them, and a lot of their learning goes in conjunction with physical stress. Physical stress will get you down to, most cases, the essence of an individual, and to make sure that they process, they understand what they're seeing. And if they do get caught in that moment, you simply freeze the exercise and ask them, hey, where are you right now? Thinking, what did you see? Tell me what you saw when you entered that dark room and you had to process things. And again, like Mr. Silver said, 3 of us can walk into the same room with different stressors based upon past experience, and you'll probably get 3 different outcomes or accounts of what we saw, what we thought was the biggest concern versus the overall concern that we may have scripted initially. So it's important that you encourage that active feedback between student and instructor, and it's important that the instructors are processing that to let the students know, okay, this is where you were, this is your foundation, this is how you're going to build upon that.
Okay. The next topic is we've already talked a little bit about de-escalation, and I was glad to hear that's how that's woven in through the entire training process. And I wanted to ask just a little bit about the training around less lethal weapons, and whether, you know, I guess everything is always going to be circumstance dependent, but is there a strong emphasis to officers to use, if a weapon is needed at all, to use the less lethal before pulling a gun out? And I just kind of wanted to hear about how you train around less lethal weapons. And just to give you an example that I think a lot of people in the African-American community see is oftentimes we see school shooters that are able to be arrested alive without being shot, and they've just committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable, and somehow they're taken alive. And then in contrast, we'll see a Black person being pulled over for a missing taillight, and within 5 minutes, they're dead. And so we see that contrast. And so we know that police have a variety of tools at their disposal to make arrests, but too often it appears as though that the officers are not leaning towards the least lethal weapons in the circumstances where it could be used for a lot of Black Americans.
Yes, ma'am. I'm understanding what you're saying. That is a rather broad-based view of it. When you look at the comparison and contrast between those circumstances, we do stress the use of less lethal weapons, be it an intermediate weapon, a baton, or electronic control device, meaning a taser or something like that. As the situations present themselves, you have to address those situations. I think we can all imagine if you walk up and an individual pulls a gun on you, you're not going to go and reach for a taser or something like that. Unfortunately,
right,
you may have to meet force with force that is direct and proportional to the force you're experiencing. But that being said, I think other departments, we've looked at everything from a trooper has everything available from a pepper spray to a baton to a taser to lethal force. You never want to rule out any options that you have. And I think that's the whole problem that people experience before de-escalation. De-escalation is teaching you to know what you have in your toolbox, how to use that effectively, and when you need to move from one weapon to another or from, instead of going with a pepper spray, you may have to go with a firearm, or vice versa. The firearm shouldn't be your first step if you're not facing anything that's a life or death situation. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Did you want to add to that?
Only that, as the colonel alluded to, a lot of what officers are trained now, it comes back to, it's, first of all, you don't teach deadly force. You teach force as a spectrum of things that an officer may do. And along with that, a big part of that is training officers how to use time, how to use that discretionary time to make better decisions. And it gets back to the critical thinking skills. Also, along with that is teaching officers to do a better job of not using buzzwords and be able to truly articulate what they're doing and why they're doing it. And what we have found is that helps with the conflict resolution, and it also helps with the critical thinking, because they start to work through in their head, well, I didn't have to escalate to this level. I was able to do this instead, while, like the colonel said, understanding that it could change drastically with a moment's notice, and I have to be prepared to do this. So I think there's a lot going into that. Now, as far as the particular weapon, that's going to be dependent on what tools are available to the officer, and that's going to be, what the particular agency has at their disposal. But a lot of it is teaching that the use of force and de-escalation go hand in hand, and you can have certain things in place that will minimize the level of force you have to use at any time.
And along with teaching officers about how to use time, do you also teach how to use space and create that distance and reduce the danger that they may feel that they're in by giving themselves more space? Is that a lot of it?
Yes, and a lot of that discretionary time, one way to build it is with space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have to build it with that space in a situation where you still have to maintain control of the area, control of the situation.
Yeah.
So they all those things that they have to take into account with that. But certainly, yes, space or cover are great ways to build more discretionary time, because the more time you have, the more possible outcomes you have, the more time you have for not just for the officer to make a good decision, but also the individual that they're trying to help.
Absolutely. Okay, another topic is still under training and education is, and you mentioned, Colonel Butler, how the Maryland State Police, that again, we're so grateful for them protecting us and keeping us safe at all of our lynching hearings. And you mentioned how they were impacted by witnessing the lynching hearings themselves. And I was just wondering how the training program includes a discussion of the history of policing vis-a-vis how it has been, how it has been used against the African American community, how it has been militarized, and can you just talk to me about whether and how that history, the involvement in the participation in lynchings, the use of police to enforce Jim Crow laws, and various other less noble uses of the police historically.
Those discussions are mixed in with the training modules themselves. When you start to talk about law enforcement in America, you go back to some very dark times.
Yes.
You think about
slave
what
patrols.
happened.
I forgot to mention the origin often coming from slave patrols as well.
Right. And I apologize if I go back, because you're freezing up intermittently on my end.
Oh, okay.
Which may be me, and I've moved my location before we got started. When you start to talk about the history of law enforcement, think about what happened, the atrocities, the Edmund Pettit Bridge. You think about Bull Connor. People need to know what the perception is of those events, how the impact of those events have shaped the future. There are things that this country should never forget. And those serve as poignant reminders during the training modules. Hey, if you're looking at it this way, think about what happened years and years ago. This might have been a standard practice years ago, whether legal or not. But in this day and age, everyone has the ability to record your actions right now, in addition to you on your body-worn camera. So, all that being said, nothing happens in a vacuum. You need to understand, one, what the expectation is of your role. Two, don't ever forget the past. It's critically important that you understand how your actions are perceived as a law enforcement officer. And at the end of the day, the actions of law enforcement officers, they're only valid when the public agrees with those actions and sees them as necessary for the safety of society.
Is it the history, the way that you say it's woven into training, is it a standalone objective to teach officers about this history as far as you're aware?
As a standalone objective under the commission, no. When it comes to how we teach at the State Police Academy, we sprinkle that in from day one.
Okay.
From day one to your graduation day, you will hear about different things going on across the nation, and how you should process those things.
And I would add to what the colonel said, that happens in every academy in the state. There is ownership, and if something happened that makes the news, it is not uncommon for as many instructors from whatever disciplines they may be from, all go into that classroom, watch whatever happened with the recruits or the candidates, and say, we have to own this because we did this, or someone looking like us in a uniform did this. And that's pretty common. It's from a historical standpoint. I know in our academy, we sprinkle it throughout as well, where we'll say, okay, the reason why people may be uncomfortable when we approach them is because this happened. We have to own this. And that's so important that we remember that and we address it instead of pretending like it never happened.
And along those lines, is there anything that you think the policing, the organization of policing should do in addition to training officers to not do it going forward? Do you think that there's anything that police should do to acknowledge publicly or in some way try to make amends for the way it has been used in the past? I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on that. So one's like a forward looking, like, okay, we're not going to do these things again. But is there a piece that you think the police should play in making amends for the way it had been used?
I think that's a really interesting perspective.
Hold on.
Am I okay now, or am I freezing?
Yeah, it's going in and out, but I think you're okay.
Okay, I think that's a really interesting perspective, and that's one of the things that we're hoping comes out of this commission, to give us a blueprint as to how to address this problem in a holistic manner. And it's not a one-shot application for this. It's something that you have to continually introduce into the curriculum, into the understanding, into in-service training. Every law enforcement officer goes through a module of in-service training every year, and the commission sees that does occur. So we need to be very deliberate with what we remind officers for, what we introduce new, and what we reinforce.
Okay. Another question is about how due process is trained. And so I'd like to hear more about how you train officers on the meaning of due process, what it entails. The American legal system is kind of predicated on the belief that it's better for 10 guilty men to go free than one innocent man to perish. And so just kind of understanding that means when you suspect someone of a crime, that's not the same thing as them being convicted, that they do have these rights, and they have the right to know what they're being charged with. They have a right to speak with an attorney. If you're speaking to a minor, they have a right to have their parent present during questioning. All of these different things. And oftentimes it appears as though in a lot of circumstances, police are looking to kind of run over those rights as opposed to being the ones of protecting citizens having those rights. And so I was kind of wondering how you get police to understand the importance of upholding due process rights, and also wondering if you ever bring in, for instance, public defenders into your training where maybe they could talk about some of the most common due process violations that they see from their perspective, from representing a number of different clients, just to offer a different perspective and kind of serve as a warning as these things are happening frequently and they shouldn't be.
The constitutional approach to law enforcement is something we teach at the very beginning of the academy, and it's reinforced everywhere every step along the academy. And when you come out, you're still getting updates in that, be it an in-service, be it a PowerPoint. But the most effective part of this is we have MSP legal counsel. We have attorneys assigned to the Maryland State Police under the authority of the Attorney General's office, and they look at all case reviews. They provide active feedback for us to go back and reinforce or change things. A lot of these case decisions that come out, they don't come out in the vacuum. The Supreme Court may put something out. It could be the state Supreme Court. And then it's up to our people to interpret that, make sure that we have a proper understanding, and go back and give that to our folks at education and training. And if it takes one of the attorneys coming down to teach that class, we do that. If it can be relayed by an instructor, we do that also. But the biggest thing, like I said initially, this training doesn't stop. The education process does not stop. It is continual.
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So I want to turn to, I think we covered a lot of things under education and training. I'd like to talk about recruitment. The roles that you guys are in with certifying who becomes a police officer. Do you also play a role in recruiting, in getting people through the door, finding potential police officers? Is that part of the hats you wear as well? Or is it more like whoever comes in, you're evaluating at that point?
Wayne, I'll start this one off if that's okay with you. When you start to talk recruiting in law enforcement, there has been so much media backlash against law enforcement, where you think in the mid-90s when I came on, you may have had 4,000 people apply for one position in an academy class. We don't see that number of people any longer. Academy classes are smaller now. And I'll speak from the state police perspective. At one point, we were getting 80 people for a class. I think up until recently, the class before this, we were down at that 19 to 25 range. Just seven weeks ago or so, or 17 weeks ago, we put in a class of 53 people. And you only get those strides by making the contacts with the public. You have to get out there. You have to go knee to knee with the people. One of the things we see, this is more of a computer-based generation. They look at social media. They're not looking at flyers. A lot of times their decision to, hey, pursue a career in law enforcement, it comes when, in between classes at college, or it's late night and they're looking at different things, different videos that spark their interest. Once you get that interest, even at a recruiting fairs used to be the perfect forum to hand out information and wait to hear back. We no longer do that. Recruiting fairs, we ask them to fill out their information on a laptop, and we maintain constant contact with them. You're not overly aggressive, but you want to have enough soft touches to keep the individual interested, to let them know what's coming each step along the way. And that's something that transitions into the academy. Academies are stressful. We noticed that other academies up and down the Eastern Seaboard, we told the candidate what to expect. Weeks 1 to 3, it'll be like this. Weeks 3 to 7, you will experience this. But the biggest thing with that recruiting piece is getting the soft touches, making sure you're part of the right conversations, being at a HBCU. If you're going out to meet at a church, make sure you get those soft touches in. And it's not just about law enforcement. The state police has a robust cadet program. Take an 18-year-old, ultimately you'd like to get them to 21 and become a trooper. But if we don't get them into that trooper's role, we've still taken an 18-year-old. We've provided them with the foundation to make good decisions. We've provided them with de facto mentors. So if he goes off or she goes off, they become a steam fitter. They become an electrician. When they hit that bump in the road of life, which we all have, they can still call back, hey, Sergeant Silver, hey, Sergeant Coles, I'm dealing with this right now. I have all these other ancillary things coming into my decision-making process. What is my foundation? How do I zero out on this? And that's an important piece of it. Again, with law enforcement, if you start to look at national trends, I don't think we're any longer looking at pensions for the most part in some areas of the country. We're still fortunate here in Maryland. I think there's some southern states that don't. They have 401ks, 457s. We're at this point where you need to just get people in the door, the right people for the right reasons that are here to impact the world for 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years. If you get them in there, there's the hope you can create that synergy that has them want to stay for 25 years. But even if they don't, if they can give their all for 3 to 5 years and bring someone else along with them, hey, I had this impact on an individual. And I think the thing that's missed the most by the media is not there when you get that outreach from an individual whether it's something as simple as a DUI where they became sober and they reach out to you with their 10-year PIN, or the individual that was about to make a bad decision and do something that would take away their freedom for an extended period of time, where they don't make that decision, their life turns around and they make that reach out. It could be a card, it could be a simple call. Hey, I understood what you meant. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
it's a difficult dynamic now.
Okay, I have a couple follow-up questions on that, but I see Commissioner Snowden has his hand up, so I just want to turn to another commissioner on the Lynching Commission.
Right. One of the things, first of all, thank you, Colonel and Mrs. Silver. It's been 5 years since the murder of George Floyd, and we know all of the fallout that came from that. But it's been universally agreed that if we're going to have systemic change through this nation, one of the things that I'd love to hear your comments on, Mr. Silver and Colonel, is on the notion that many are advocating that one of the ways we get the police officers to act more professional and to be able to make sure that they rethink their actions is by removing qualified immunity. Police officers with qualified immunity have the ability, as you well know, to be able to do something horrendous, and then have the state of Maryland, through the Attorney General's office and others, to be able to legally protect them based on this qualified immunity. One of the things I'm going to strongly recommend to this commission is that we recommend to the Maryland General Assembly that we remove qualified immunity. So, Mr. Silver, as somebody who's training and been involved for a number of years, what would be your reaction if a recommendation was made to remove qualified immunity?
Well, from a commission perspective, sir, we pretty much follow the direction of the Maryland General Assembly. We were heavily involved with the Police Accountability Act, as some of you may be aware. I have had the good fortune of meeting every single member of every ACC in the entire state, as well as everyone who's been on the trial board. I've actually been in the training for all of them. But back to your question more directly, is law enforcement is fluid, as I think the Colonel would agree. And there have been a lot of changes in law enforcement, like the Police Accountability Act, where we will adjust and move forward. And a lot of it is in law enforcement training, it gets back to training officers to make those good decisions. And back to when we were talking about the, constitutional policing, it's not just taught in those classes, but it's taught in your ethics classes as well. We really emphasize, because qualified immunity does come up, that it's about making good critical decisions ethically is what officers will do. And when we talk about an officer's responsibility to intervene, oftentimes people tend to focus on the intervention being if there's excessive force being used. But that duty to intervene also comes into play if they see that someone's constitutional rights are being violated. They have a requirement to do that as well. So the commission, we get a lot of direction from the General Assembly, and we move forward with it.
Well, I understand that. And again, I'm just asking you, as somebody who's done training, whether you think a recommendation that would remove your personal view, if you will. I understand whatever the Maryland General Assembly do, you will have to carry out. But as someone who deals with police officers on a regular basis, who've had the experience, I'm just very curious as to whether or not you think it would be helpful if the commission's recommendation was to remove in the state of Maryland this thing called qualified immunity. And just to make sure that I know Colonel Butler knows I'm well aware of the various issues. We had a situation that's real in Maryland. I really would like to, again, also hear your view on this. During the controversy with George Floyd, a police officer who sent out a vicious, nasty, despicable email following the death of George Floyd was protected in many ways because of this qualified immunity. He eventually left the department, but the consequences would have been far worse for him personally had he not had that protection. So I'm just curious as to, again, your view, and if you don't have one, that's fine. Love to hear what Colonel Butler says, as well as somebody who spent 30 years working in law enforcement, whether or not he believes, as many advocates across the country believe, that if you really want systemic change in departments, removing qualified immunity would go a long way. I'll wait to hear your answer.
Colonel, you want to take it or you want me to?
I can take it.
Okay.
Qualified immunity is a double-edged sword. When you talk about removing it altogether, you're going to have an impact on the individuals that come into law enforcement. First and foremost, you know, we all have families, and qualified immunity has its place, but it's also had an unintended consequence of shielding people from actions that are grossly inappropriate. And I think you've seen courts rule that qualified immunity does not apply in many instances. I think the one that you're referring to, that individual is not protected as much as you think they are. They have to pay for their own counsel at this point. Yes, the department is still on the hook with that, but that matter has yet to be finally adjudicated. Yes, they left the department, which is unfortunate. The department did what they could to prevent that. But that was one of those things that we discussed. It occurred during COVID, where the courts were locked up. And I think there were a number of mechanisms in place that allowed that individual to delay. You come back to qualified immunity. If you remove that protection, and this has come up in discussions before. I think we had one out at Bowie State a few years back, Bowie State University, with some healthy exchange with the student body. Do you start to say, okay, a law enforcement officer should have to carry their own insurance, for instance? Or do you look at qualified immunity as it stands now, let the courts decide case by case where qualified immunity applies, and it's not a blanket coverage for anyone? So I think there are two sides to the issue. Each has a cause and effect. I think by and large, the conversations in law enforcement, we would be concerned what we would have left, recruiting, retention, things like that, if you take it away altogether.
Thank you for your response. Michelle,
Ms.
you,
Coles speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was gonna say, do you want me to take it back, Commissioner Snowden? Thank you for asking that question.
thank you. Thank you so very much. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to drop off very shortly for another meeting. Can I just make one last point? First, Colonel, thank you very much. One of the things that has been strongly recommended, we've had internal conversations with you and your department, just the need for police departments to hear very loud and clear from its leadership that the conduct in the past is not acceptable. What has been done in the past is not acceptable. And one of the things I would suggest strongly to the Colonel, and Mr. Silver, you certainly can have play some role in this. There will come a time when this final report is going to be done as it relates to recommendations. If you guys have some really specific, systemic recommendations that you would like to have the commission consider as part of our final report, I think it would be very, very helpful. I want to also say that I've talked to a lot of police officers in Maryland, both current police officers who are chief of police, as well as former chief of police, and they understand the culture very, very well. And so for those of you who have the expertise and the uniqueness of being both an African American, as in the case of the chief, who himself have indicated he has been the victims of certain disparate treatment, we have this unique opportunity for you and others who are in law enforcement to make a recommendation to the commission on what you think might be helpful as we move forward with our final recommendations. Again, I really strongly feel that qualified immunity does cut both ways, no question about that. But every study I've seen, every professional in the field has said, one of the things that qualified immunity does is put the responsibility directly on the police officer for his or her actions. So I'd love to hear some really specific recommendations coming from you and Mr. Silver to the commission based on your experiences, what you think would be helpful as we make some final determination. Michelle, again, thank you for this opportunity to just share that point of view.
Thank you so much for contributing.
Ms.
Okay.
Coles,
Oh,
Ms. Coles, I'm coming down to crunch time. I'm
Oh.
going to jump off for about 30 seconds, just jump off camera to clear up one matter, and then I may have like another 5 minutes left, 10 minutes.
got it. Okay. Okay, good to know. All right. Going back to the recruitment question, is there a centralized database that that Maryland police are able to tap into to learn about any past disciplinary actions of police candidates? And if there is a database like that, is it limited to just prior employment in Maryland, or is there anything nationally that if someone's coming from Cleveland or wherever, where you're just able to see what their record is like?
Well, there's a couple things with that. There's not a nationwide database focused on applicants, potential applicants. There is one for individuals who have been certified as police officers in other states. It's known as the National Decertification Index. And what that is if an individual has had their certification pulled or revoked, different states call it different things, their name is placed in this database. And obviously, state of Maryland, we participate in that as well. It's a little more complicated with applicants because when you apply to be a police officer, you're asked to give a lot of information. And what I used to tell when I did a lot of recruiting was that we understand everybody has 15 minutes they wish they could take back in their life. But the big thing is, are you being honest about what happened in your 15 minutes? Because what my commission does is we look at the totality of what occurred, but we also focus on what the actual behavior was. And kind of as the colonel alluded to, is are you sorry for what you did? Do you take responsibility for what you did? Those type of things. And if we have a situation and we have day-long commission meetings where we make the full 20-member body of the commission will make decisions on an individual as to whether or not either A, they want to certify them initially as a police officer, or B, they've been a police officer and they were willing to recertify them. They make those decisions at every meeting we have. So we don't take it lightly. We don't take it for granted. Now, one thing Maryland has that a lot of other states do not have is the Public Safety Act directs that if the person has been a police officer, that hiring agency must go back and look at the internal files of that person at every department they have ever worked at, not just the most recent one. And one of the things we implemented at our commission is that when people give us that information, we have perjury statements on the documents as well. So that gives us a little bit more teeth. And as I said, we send auditors out to validate the information as well. So there's a lot of moving parts. With not as much with applicants because they're giving a lot of private information.
Yeah.
And our commission doesn't even know the person's not even on our radar until someone wants to hire them.
Okay. And relatedly, do you ask any questions or make any effort to ascertain if the candidate has any involvement with white supremacy organizations or hate groups or anything like that? Is that one of the questions that's asked? And is there any independent effort to try to verify if the answer is truthful?
Well, that goes back to the background investigation that is done by the agency themselves. That would be one of the particulars that would immediately disqualify them.
Okay.
From being a police officer. Now, is there a specific questionnaire that they have to check off when they put in an application for certification? There is not. But when our auditors go out and review, because we audit selection standards, and we have audited selection standards of individuals who have been police officers for 15, 20 years, and they probably never thought anybody was going to go back and look at the paperwork, and we do. And in those, if we see an area that wasn't covered in the background that has to be covered, because a lot of that would be with, same thing of what affiliations do they have, those type of things. The auditor would say, where did you address this part of the background requirement?
Okay. Turning to accountability, Commissioner Snowden asked, thankfully, he asked one of the questions I had about qualified immunity and what you thought about amending that. Another question is about citizen review councils.
Mhm.
Do those exist in for most police departments in Maryland or at all? Is there a level of citizen involvement in looking at police complaints about police and holding officers accountable for their actions?
Part of the Maryland Police Accountability Act that passed a few years ago, every state, to include Baltimore City, and there's also a statewide ACC as well, they have what's known as an administrative charging committee. So every complaint that is made against a police officer that involves a member of the public is investigated by the department, and it is sent to this administrative charging committee, which is made up of citizens of that county, to make a determination whether they recommend that the officer should be administratively charged or not administratively charged.
And is the decision that they make, is it binding or can it be overruled within the department?
It cannot be overruled by the department. What the agency head can do is, when they send over the investigative file, because they're giving them the entire file to review, they can make a recommendation on what they feel the ACC should do. And that is in no way binding at all. So if they could say, I feel the officer should get 5 days off, and we also have a statewide disciplinary matrix, which gives us some uniformity. What they would do is, the only option the agency head has is they can raise the penalty higher within the category that the charging committee recommended.
Okay. But
So
they
can't lessen it,
they can't lessen
but
it.
they can raise the penalty within that category. So if it was something that was a low level misconduct and they were given a letter of counsel, they could take it to a letter of reprimand, and they couldn't go all the way to termination.
And is there an appeal beyond the AAC?
The officer has the right to request a trial board at that time if they don't want to accept the recommendation of the ACC. And that trial board is made up of a police officer of equal rank, an administrative law judge or a retired judge, and also one member of the community where the issue occurred.
Okay. And then at that point, the decision's
Ultimately, they could also then appeal to the circuit court if they felt that it was,
okay.
they didn't agree with the trial board.
Got it.
So, Ms. Coles, just one of the things to throw out there is food for thought. This whole process is relatively new that Mr. Silva described. Being a part of the Police and Sheriff's Association, one of the things that we're hearing by and large is that a lot of times the ACC are giving lesser punishments than the department would have recommended. So I think there's still an open and active conversation there. Mr. Silver attends those meetings, and there's some discussion just to review certain aspects of the matrix, things like that, to make sure that we have it right for the citizens. Any policy, any document, a living document. And, we owe it to the citizenry and the law enforcement officers to go back and look at those to make sure we are where we need to be to curtail inappropriate behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And similarly, is there an early warning system if you're seeing an officer that's received a certain number of complaints? Is there like a flag that goes off that would have you bring that officer in for a conversation?
The state police does have such a system, and it's based on a totality of circumstances, different events, things like that, where we would think that there needs to be intervention. That intervention can occur at multiple levels with the first line supervisor, the commander, or ultimately it could be someone in our medical services section. Hey, this individual needs to be talked to make sure that everything is going on the way we see it going on. We're no different than any place else. Sometimes people bring external factors into the workplace with them. And I think the last thing you want to do is miss any indication that an individual has a problem in the workplace. And most certainly that individual doesn't take that workplace problem home and do something that they should.
And along with that,
deadline here.
Along with that, every police officer in Maryland, as a condition of their certification, must submit to a mental health assessment every 2 years. Just to kind of, as the colonel alluded to just kind of make sure that, hey, we're getting a good picture of what's going on in this individual's life.
Do all officers, do they have access to free counseling, mental health services if they wanted to avail themselves of that?
Every department, as of last year, had to have a wellness program. My commission actually developed the parameters of the wellness program. It looks very similar to what the Maryland State Police use because we kind of use that as the template. But yes, every law enforcement agency and correctional facility must have a wellness program in place.
Okay.
And also at MSP, we kind of took it a step further. We have a clinical psychologist available to our troopers. So that being said, Ms. Cole, I'd hate to do this, but I do need to walk off and walk into an engagement and give a short presentation.
Well,
Okay.
we're so grateful for your time. We hope we can stay in touch. And
Yes, ma'am.
as Commissioner Snowden said, keep exchanging ideas. Mr. Silver, are you able to stay with us a little longer?
Just a little bit longer, I can.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
Colonel Butler. So Colonel Butler said that the Maryland State Police had an early warning system. Do the local police are they plugged into an early warning system as well?
Most do. I can't answer for all 156.
It's not uniform. It's
not-
department specific.
It's not uniform. And also with the wellness programs, a lot of them are resource specific. What we found when we were developing this program, this model program for them, is that there were some areas where the resources just are not available. And what we've really tried to get agencies to start doing is partnering with other agencies. And, you may have 5 jurisdictions that are in close proximity. Well, we have a program together so we can use more resources.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the, there's not a universal early warning system. Now, I will tell you one thing that cannot happen in Maryland. Well, never say never, never say always, but it shouldn't happen in Maryland. Is you may have heard the phrase that police officers try to outrun the complaints. Whereas, okay, I know there's a complaint coming, so I'm going to resign and I'm going to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that in Maryland.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One, you have to go, if you want to hire someone who's been a police officer elsewhere, you have to go look at that file. And even if it's from an outside the state, you have to show us you had someone, your proxy, look at it. Most departments will use the local state police to go look for them, or a contractor, or some type of contract service that does backgrounds. But what happens in Maryland is, let's say, for example, I know that I'm about to get disciplined for something significant. So I just quit. Okay, that's fine. But everybody who's certified has to be, they have to notify my commission in what's known as a notice of personnel action. And they have to tell us how they left and why they left with a perjury statement. And it's interesting. A lot of times people will call me saying, am I flagged? We don't flag, but that's a little check and balance to make sure that everybody's doing their work. So if Department A tries to hire someone and they didn't go look at Department B's paperwork, and we've got in there that they left with an open investigation, we're going to flag it and say, no, we're not accepting this. You have to go and look at that and tell us what it was. And we're kind of at a situation now. It's interesting because officers are leaving with open investigations, and in some cases, the officer didn't even know that it was ongoing because the complaint came in after they left.
Mm-hmm.
But it still goes down. And some things are significant, and in those cases, we take them in front of the commission to determine if we want to certify. What I'm very proud of our commission doing is that we will take them in front of the commission, even if there's nothing that was founded. If we see a pattern of behavior and we're like, this, they seem to have a lot of these, come in front of the commission and explain to us why we should certify you.
Mm-hmm.
And one last thing on this topic I'll share with you is that Maryland is unique. We don't certify the person, we certify the person in the position. So the moment you leave that department, the day you walk out the door, you are no longer certified as a police officer in Maryland. And if you want to be recertified again, that hiring agency has to do a full background on you, look at that internal affairs file, everything. Whereas some states, you take your certification for like 2 or 3 years. In Maryland, the moment you leave, if you retire from Baltimore City Police on Friday and you start working for the Baltimore City Sheriff's Office on Monday, the Baltimore City Sheriff's Office has to put in a brand new application for certification to us. So, and that's, occasionally we find things out that way. That, hey, no, that's how we find out, no, they have an open investigation. Now, they run the whole gamut from very severe things to, I had one that the officer didn't turn their hat in, and that's why they had an open investigation. But you know what? We'd rather have that than have something slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that, and because of that, Maryland doesn't hold a lot of revocations, because once the person is no longer working for the department, they have no certification to revoke. It's automatically gone.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think I just have 2 more topics I wanted to try to touch on.
Okay.
One is community policing, and I just want to get an understanding of what is uniform within community policing across the state. I know Colonel Butler mentioned that, some departments might have a mentoring program. And are there any requirements that you would see in every police department, and kind of how is community policing institutionalized?
Well, one thing, in addition to the certifications that our commission does, we also publish reports. And one of the reports that we have to publish every other year is on community policing. And part of that report is departments have to tell us what they're changing in their community policing programs. And what we have found in these reports is that a lot of times it's resource specific on what they're doing and not doing. But I can tell you that as a general baseline of what we're seeing in community policing, a lot of it's starting with building that bridge between the constituents, the citizens of your jurisdiction, wherever it may be, and as and using them as a resource for information and the sharing of information and good communication skills, those type of things. But there is not something that is, you must have A, B, and C in your community policing program.
Do you think we could pull from your report what are some of the best practices that different departments are doing? And if properly resourced, maybe every department might be able to do more of?
I think you could. I tell you, an organization that would have better information than we would, and that is the Maryland Chiefs Association and the Maryland Sheriffs Association.
Okay.
Because there are a few agencies out there that don't have a per se community policing program, so they don't report to us.
Okay.
But they're all members of the Maryland Chiefs, Maryland Sheriffs.
Okay.
What's interesting is the GOCAP. I don't know if you're familiar with them, the Governor's Office on Crime Prevention.
Okay.
They get a lot of similar reports as we do. There's a couple, like we have one on serious incident reporting that they have to make to us, and they get a very similar report. So that may also be a resource you may want to look, because they do a lot with handling juveniles, and a lot of reports. They give out grants. They're more intricately involved with those type of community programs than our commission is.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. We may need to speak with them. And then the last, and this kind of relates to community policing, but it also ties back to the overarching topic of lynching, is just how is hate crimes addressed within the training, the education, the prioritization. Year after year, African Americans are the most frequent victim of hate crimes. And addressing that, I think, could go a long way to improving community policing relationships, because it's just a great opportunity to hear from people and show that you are protecting their communities. And so it's not approaching the community from an enforcement perspective, but from a protection perspective. Right. And so can you just talk about how hate crimes is addressed and prioritized?
A couple ways. The first one is, obviously, one of our entry-level objectives is to be able to define what a hate crime is. But then, so that's more of it's part of the criminal law portion of the program, so that they can understand what it is, what the elements of the crime are. But then we also talk about victim awareness and how to deal with people that are in crisis because they have been a victim of a crime, to include hate crimes, how to respond to them, and the bigger impact that crime may have on the community. One of the examples is that, say somebody paints a swastika on a synagogue. Well, what impact is this having on the community, and how the police officers police in that community? What message are they sending? Are they sending messages that, this is a serious issue? This isn't just, kids playing or whatever it may be, some silliness like that. And then we also cover it on the back end with what the crime is, how victims' responses to this crime can be, but also what resources are available for the person outside of the police agency itself. And that's something that in the past few years we've really invested heavily in, because we're really starting to become more aware that policing is a team sport. And that team sport isn't just the people wearing the badge. It's the members of the community. It's the community organizations that are there. It's other government entities, whether it's within the mental health community or victim advocates and victim rights organizations. So a lot of it is really understanding what resources are available. And as I said early on, how we really tried to get officers to critically think better. This is one of those areas where if you respond to something, your job isn't just to take a report. Your job is to help fix this problem and see, are you fixing a symptom or are you fixing the true problem? And a lot of that comes back to knowing what resources are available in the community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for this honest conversation. I think it's just been incredibly helpful in helping us flesh out and think through our ideas. I know your time is tight. Do you mind if I ask just if any other commissioner just has one question before?
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to put it out there if any other commissioner has a question before we wrap up. Going once, going twice. Okay, well, that's how well you answered all of these questions, because we don't have any more. But thank you again. And also, please give our gratitude again to Colonel Butler. And as Commissioner Snowden said, we really hope we can keep the lines of communication open. And if there are recommendations that you think of that would be helpful, please share them with us. As we're formulating our recommendations, if we're able to reach back out to you and just kind of ask, do you think this could work, or help us figure out how it could work better, we'd really appreciate that.
And I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Give me a call at any time, or if you want to have another meeting, I'm happy to do that. But yes, however we can help and assist, we'll be more than happy to.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Davis just raised her hand.
I'm sorry, I was over here listening intently. I couldn't find my button. I guess my one question is, as we think about like recommendations, how we're going to think about recommendations for police in dealing with people with mental health issues, because I think that's one of the issues that's really concerning to me, is like how we protect people who may be at crisis and keep them living.
So we have a lot of objectives, both in our entry-level program, but also it's a mandated requirement for in-service, to train officers to interact with individuals with developmental disabilities. And now, one of the things that we've done with that is we have broadened the perspective of what would constitute a developmental disability and know the signs and the symptoms. I'm kind of dating myself, but I went through academy in 1988. Please don't do the math. And back then, there was a lot of emphasis placed on is trying to pigeonhole people. And what we do more now is we try to train officers to it's not your job to diagnose the person. It's your job to deal with an individual in crisis. And we do that through ICAT training. My commission just approved curriculum for crisis intervention teams in Maryland, where if you want to have a crisis intervention team or training and you want it to be certified by the commission, you have to meet certain requirements or we're not going to approve it for you. So we're really starting to do that. We were actually, we worked very close with Delegate Wilkins on Eric's Law. I just had a meeting on that last week for individuals who have non-apparent disabilities, putting some type of identifier on driver's license or identifications to let the officer
You're
know.
speaking exactly to what I'm talking about. Thank you so much, Mr. Silver. It's that because it's not always, ever present. This is your
Exactly.
passion. So thank you for addressing that. And
You're
keep
very
going.
welcome.
Sorry.
And does every department, it sounds like every department does not have a crisis intervention team. Some do, some don't.
Correct. Because that's a lot of it is resource intensive. A lot of them, they may have one that is county-wide. Some of the larger departments may have one within that county, but they have the resources available. Even the ones who perhaps don't have a specific crisis intervention team, they often will defer to another entity, such as the sheriff's office or someone that's larger that has those resources available for them.
And do you know if dispatch is being, and that's probably outside of the training you guys do, or maybe it's included, is dispatch being trained on how to communicate the circumstances so that officers can be aware of if someone, if it is known that someone is in mental health crisis or has a developmental disability or something like that? Is your office involved in how dispatch is trained to communicate relevant information?
We are not directly involved in their training or certification, but we kind of we play a part, and a big part of that is with the crisis intervention teams. It incorporates the dispatchers because oftentimes they're going to be the first individuals to identify that a person is in crisis. What we also do with police officers now is we try to get officers away from using terms that sort of cover everything. Like the one we always tell them is, if you get a call that someone's being suspicious, well, articulate to me, and this starts with the dispatcher, what's suspicious? Because it may not be suspicious, it may just be a person in crisis. And starting to learn what that is. So much of the training that officers get on how to interact with individuals with developmental disabilities is also given to dispatchers as well. And frankly, I know that because one of my daughters is a dispatcher.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you again for your time. I'm just going to turn it over to Commissioner Creary in case he wants to bring us home.
Well, again, just thank you, Mr. Silver, and to Colonel Butler. Thank you, Commissioner Coles, for leading such a rich conversation. I know I've got a whole bunch of notes coming, out of this, and I think this will certainly be wonderful information that we can bring to the conversations in the Reconciliation Committee as we continue to work on, putting together the recommendations. I'm grateful that Mr. Silver, you and Colonel Butler are open to continuing the conversation, because I know as I think about this stuff, I'll probably have more questions, and I'm grateful that you're willing to keep the lines of communication open so that we can continue the conversation. So thank you. As I'm looking at who's still on the call and the agenda, honestly, I don't think we got the minutes for the last meeting, so we won't need to worry about trying. We'll ratify those next month. But public comment, if there are members of the public that would like to share thoughts or ideas, I'll give you a moment to do that if you would like. And if not, then I would just ask for again, thank you to Mr. Silver, to Colonel Butler, and to Commissioner Coles. Hearing no further comments or questions, I would move that we adjourn, and we'll pick up again next month. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for this wonderful conversation, and we'll see you. Happy Juneteenth later this week, and we'll see you next month then.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Take care.